Hey guys, tonight we slip into the warm glow of a flickering world one where time doesn't tick or beep or buzz, but instead melts slowly down the side of a beeswax taper. You're wrapped in a woolen robe, sandals slapping against stone, and somewhere ahead of you in the corridor is a soft orange glow, just enough to light the floor, not enough to warm your fingers. This isn't a place of hurry, this is a monastery. And here, the hours don't rush forward like traffic or sprint, like digital seconds, no. Here, time drips, one tiny blob of wax at a time. You'll soon find out that in this quiet, cloistered world, the candle is more than light. It is order, it is discipline. It is how Brother Tellard knows when to stop copying psalms and when to eat his 3 sad turnips. You think your phone battery dying is inconvenient. Imagine miscounting a wax marking and missing your only meal of the day. You probably won't survive this timeline. But don't worry, you don't have to live it, Jews. Imagine it. With me before you get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere unusual, post your location and the time right now. I love seeing where and when people drift off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, you push open the heavy wooden door. Inside is a narrow stone, cell-cold, dry, monastic. The air is scented faintly with beeswax and old ink. A single candle flickers beside a scroll-littered desk, and in front of it sits a thin figure, wrapped in silence. This is Brother Edwin, and whether he knows it or not, he's training you to understand the slowest clock on earth. He doesn't own a watch. His monastery has no mechanical gears, no water clocks, no sundials indoors. What he does have what? All the monks depend on is a small stash of carefully measured candles, each designed to burn for exactly 1 hour, or at least roughly 1 hour. Let's just say it's accurate enough to get through Vespers without setting the abbey on fire. Now, you'd think it's easy: light a candle, wait for it to burn, and bam, 1 hour. But here's the twist. Candles in medieval monasteries were like spreadsheets made of wax. Every inch mattered. A typical timekeeping candle was made of beeswax, marked with small notches or colored threads, each notch representing a portion of an hour. Some had 12 notches for 12 hours, some had 6 for the nighttime prayers, some even had embedded weights that dropped with a tiny clink when the wax reached the ancient, flaming hourglass. But not all candles are created equal. Tallow burned faster than beeswax. Cold rooms made flames shiver and flicker. Humidity slowed things down. If Brother Edwin was in a bad mood, he might have blamed a late compline on the candle itself, or maybe on the wind through the arrow-slit windows. Monks didn't argue often, but when they did, it was usually over 3 things: theology, fasting rules, and how long that candle actually took to burn. And speaking of fasting, monks lived on an exact schedule: meals, prayers, copying, manuscripts, even silence itself, all of it had designated time slots. Miss a bell, and you weren't just late. You were spiritually out of sync. Some abbeys believed that a misaligned day could risk the very health of the soul, which makes it a little awkward when you realize their entire schedule relied on something that could blow out if someone sneezed. There's a beautiful irony here. Monks, those sworn to routines more precise than modern planners, were at the mercy of open flame. Wax became sacred in more ways than one, not just for light, but for its ability to measure divine time. And Brother Edwin is watching it closely. eyes reflecting the glow, lips silently mouthing the hour's psalm. Historians still argue whether the time candle was first adopted out of practicality or symbolism. Was it the cheapest method, or was it chosen precisely because of its fragility? After all, a flame is fleeting. A day is brief. What better way to remind yourself of mortality and holiness than watching the hours literally melt away? You glance. At the wall, there's no clock, just a soft shadow stretching slowly as the candle shortens. There's a faint smell of smoke, a rustle of parchment, a distant cough from another cell. The world outside might be chaos lords taxing villagers, Vikings raiding up north, kings being poisoned over dinner, but in here, the only rush is between 2 inches of wax. And here's your first quirky fact of the night. Some monks weren't just timekeepers. They were candle engineers. Entire manuals were devoted to wick thickness, wax purity, and flame height. There's even a record of a monk who tried using goose grease to extend his candles. It did not end well. Apparently, goose candles burn, with a smell you cannot pray through. Yet despite these tiny innovations, the candle was more than a toolet, was almost a character in the monastery's life. It demanded attention. It needed trimming. Its soot left marks on the ceiling, and its melted remnants were carefully collected, weighed, and reformed. Nothing wasted, not even time itself. You start to feel sleepy, lulled by the rhythm of brother Edwin's quiet breathing and the occasional crackle of hot wax. The candle is halfway done now, and you, like the monks, begin to sense time not as numbers on a screen, but as a feeling in your chest. The slow pull of evening, the hush between bells, the flicker of light on stone, so you sit a while longer and watch the flame grow smaller. Asterisk, you lean closer to the flame, not out of urgency, but out of curiosity. The candle barely trembles, its tiny flame dancing just enough to remind you that time here is alive, fragile, flickering, never perfectly still. Brother Edwin doesn't speak. He hasn't spoken all day. But as your eyes follow the slow ooze of wax down the side of the candle, you realize you're beginning to understand him without words. You're learning the same silent language that's guided monks through centuries, the language of light. It's not just about marking hours. These candles were tools of divine calibration. Time, for monks, wasn't measured for convenience, was measured for holiness. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, laid out a strict schedule for prayer, work, reading, and rest. The day was split into canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Try saying that list 5 times fast. Or better yet, try waking up for matins at 2 a.m. because the candle told you to. And yes, 2 a.m. meant exactly that, not just a vague sometime before sunrise. The monks didn't guess. They burned a specially marked candle through the first part of the night and knew, by its length, when it was time to rouse the others. A bell would ring, sandaled feet would shuffle, cloaks would rustle, all because the wax said so. But what happened when the candle was wrong? Well, it happened often. Some monasteries tried to fix this with double a candle. Systems light 2 identical candles at once and compare the flames. If one burned faster, you trimmed it. Others embedded small metal balls or pins into the wax at each hourly mark. When the wax reached the pin, it would fall with a delicate clink onto a metal tray, kind of like your phone's notification tone. But 800 years earlier and way less annoying. Still, this system had its problems. Rodents liked to nibble on candles. Damp weather made wax sag. Once, a gust of wind from a cracked window blew out the only timekeeping taper mid-lords, throwing the whole day into gentle, spiritual chaos. You haven't truly lived until you've seen 8 robed monks debating whether it's prime yet, with nobody quite sure and everybody too polite to say, "Let's just wing it." Historians still argue whether these kinds of accidents were tolerated or punished. Some abbeys were strict. Others embraced the occasional lapse in schedule as part of God's mystery. One Benedictine chronicle even jokes about a brother oversleeping due to a faulty wick and being assigned extra candle trimming duty as penance. Imagine losing your weekend because your clock melted funny. And don't assume the monks just sat around waiting for the wax to do its thing. Their lives were full. When they weren't praying, they were copying texts, tending gardens, treating the sick, making beer, illuminating manuscripts, or arguing over who got the slightly larger lump of cheese at lunch. Candle time governed all of it, even the cheese. You stretch your legs and stand. The stone beneath you is cool. As you step into the corridor, you notice other candles glowing behind other wooden doors, each one a tiny lighthouse guiding someone through the fog of another hour. Some monks are already gathering in the chapel. Others are still lost in study. The air is hushed, as if everyone's breath is syncing with the same silent rhythm. And just when you think you've grasped how deeply candles shaped monastic life, you find out about the dividing candles. Oh yes, some monks needed to measure even smaller slices of time. For example, how long to meditate on a single psalm, or how long to boil an egg if you're lucky enough to get one. For these tasks, they'd cut a normal hour candle into thirds or quarters. Not literally sliced thither. They'd mark it finely with threads or colored wax so they could track 10-minute intervals. That's right, medieval monks had the ancient version of a kitchen timer. Here's your fringe fact for the section. In one surviving set of instructions from a Carthusian monastery, a monk details how to adjust candle burning time depending on the season by thickening the wick in summer and thinning it in winter. Because beeswax burns differently depending on temperature. So yes, you could say they had seasonal time zones, controlled not by the sun, but by fat little ropes of fiber set on fire in a stone room. It's hard not to admire the ingenuity. No gears, no screens, no satellites. Just wax, fire, patience, and a little math. You start to realize how modern your sense of time really is, how you rely on vibrating quartz and international atomic standards. But for the monk walking silently down the corridor beside you now, the length of a prayer and the span of a day are written in flame. He nods at you. You nod back. No one speaks. Words feel too sharp for this hour. In the chapel, candles are already burning. Their light makes the gold trim on the altar shimmer like water. You take a seat in the back, on a cold wooden bench. Around you, more. Monks drift in like ghosts, silent, solemn, sleepy. A bell rings once, then silence. Then chanting begins, not loud, not rushed, just the slow melodic hum of words written centuries earlier, echoing across a hall lit only by melting time. And you sit in that moment, fully outside the digital world, measuring your heartbeat not in seconds, but in flame. Asterisk, you blink slowly in the candlelight, your eyes adjusting not to the darkness, but to a different tempo. Outside, the world spins on wristwatches and smartphone. Alerts, but inside this cloister, the pace has been set by fire. Always will be, at least for now. The monk's chant rolls on, steady as a tide, and you can't help but notice they never look at the candles. They don't need to. Their bodies know the rhythm already. But someone, somewhere, is still watching the wax. Because every moment here depends on someone tracking the subtle collapse of a candle's spine. And tonight, that someone is you. After the final syllables of Compline fade, the chapel begins to empty. No rush, no chatter, just soft robes brushing against stone, the creak of wooden doors. Brother Edwin gestures, gently no words, and leads you toward the Scriptorium, the manuscript room. But not for writing tonight. Tonight, you'll be tending the horology. That's what they call the candle clock here. It sounds fancy, but really it's just a carved stand that holds the timekeeping candle upright, with tiny grooves etched into the side to mark each hour. You're responsible for keeping it trimmed, shielded from drafts, and critically relite. If it goes out, no pressure. The Scriptorium is colder than the chapel, and somehow even quieter. Tables are pushed back for the night. A few manuscripts lie open under muslin cloths, like sleeping animals. In the corner, the horologium candle glows from a brass holder. It's wide, creamy white, already burning its second hour. You're to watch it until midnight, then wake Brother Paulus for his turn. That's 3 hours of wax watching, unless you fall asleep. In which case, well, that's where the story of Brother Halbert comes in. According to the older monks, Brother Halbert once fell asleep on candle duty and woke up to find the entire abbey an hour late to mass. In the confusion, the bread overbaked, the rooster crowed early, and one monk accidentally skipped prime entirely. As punishment, Halbert had to eat only boiled turnips for a month. He eventually left to join a less time-obsessed order. Franciscans, maybe, or possibly a traveling theatre troupe. Historians still argue whether Brother Halbert was real or just an excellent cautionary tale. You settle on the bench beside the candle, wrap your robe tighter, and listen. The flame makes no sound, but your ears start picking up everything else. The faint hiss of wind outside, the scrape of a mouse somewhere behind a crate, the occasional settling creak of old beams, and of course, the whispering of wax. It doesn't actually talk, obviously, but it moves thinning at the sides, bulging slightly at the base, tilting ever so slightly forward as the minutes pass. You begin to see why monks didn't just use sundials or water clocks. Those had their place, sure, outside, in gardens, in summer. But a candle fits in the dark. A candle is the dark, in slow retreat. Here's something the history books won't always mention. Candle clocks were sometimes scented, not like your lavender bedtime candle, but subtly infused with herbs, rosemary, sage, or bay leaf. Not for luxury, but for practicality. Certain scents repelled insects, others marked seasons. In winter, a pinch of cinnamon. In spring, crushed mint. You wouldn't expect monks to be candle perfumers, but there you are. And then there were the night watch tricks. You were allowed to read, softly, during candle duty, scripture only, of course. But more than a few clever monks taught themselves to guess time not by the candle itself, but by how many psalms they could recite before the wax reached the next notch. One monk's record was reportedly 18 psalms per hour, though whether that included pauses for sneezes or philosophical reflection is unclear. You try it yourself, half whispering a line from Psalm 4. In peace I will lie down and sleep. It feels oddly appropriate, but sleep is the enemy here. So you stand, stretch, walk slowly around the scriptorium. You pass the candle again, still steady, still right on schedule. The grooves marked on the side are made of thread, sunk gently into the wax so they burn slightly darker. You're almost to the third thread, meaning it's nearly 10 p.m., 2 hours left. You sip from a little tin cup of barley tea someone left behind. It's tepid, earthy, not especially delicious, but warm. You remind yourself that in earlier centuries, monks might have used beer to stay awake during vigils. Low alcohol, thick beer made in the very same cloisters. After all, God may have made barley, but monks made it interesting. Back at the candle, you notice something odd. The flame's grown taller, a draft. You check the window slits. Closed, the flame dances, again just briefly. And you lean close. Then you spot it. A small clump in the wick, hardened wax slowing the burn. If you don't trim it, the candle might drip unevenly or worse, sputter out. You grab the iron snuffer scissors nearby, hands a little clumsy in the cold. One careful snip, a hiss. The flame shrinks slightly, then steadies. Crisis averted. You feel ridiculously proud. Monks didn't just use candles. They trusted them to guide prayer, to signal shifts, to summon souls to chapel or allow the scribes an extra hour of light. That trust meant being vigilant even at odd hours, even when your toes were numb and your stomach faintly growled and all you wanted was to curl up like a cat near a warm hearth. Instead, you keep watching. The candle shrinks. Another debate among historians. How consistent were these hour-marked candles really? Some surviving examples differ wildly in size, even within the same monastery. Some had 10 marks per candle, others had 24. One abbey even tried 60, hoping to measure minutes. Spoiler, it did not work. Wax has its limits, but tonight yours is working perfectly. You glance at the groove. Midnight approaches. You lift the bell. Not the big tower. Bell just a small hand chime, barely audible beyond the room. You ring it once. A minute later, the door creaks. Brother Paulus appears, bleary-eyed, wordless, already tying his robe. You nod. He nods. Time has passed hands. You step outside, where the corridor is cold and deliciously quiet. Your shift is over. The candle burns on, now watched by someone else. And you, in your strange little midnight victory, walk back to your chamber with a warmth that has nothing to do with fire. Asterisk your feet whispered down the stone hallway, softened by the worn soles of your sandals. Behind you, Brother Paulus tents the flame, and the faint glow of the candle clock flickers on the wall as you retreat. The monastic silence of night still enfolds everything. Yet now you feel more tuned to it, like someone who's learned the language of shadows. You return to your narrow cell. Not a prison, despite the word, just a bare stone room with a cot, a wooden stool, and a tiny shelf with a psalter and a worn scrap of cloth. You blow gently across the rough blanket, sending a puff of dust into the air, then slide under it. Still warm from your own slow triumph at the horologium. But don't get too comfortable. You've agreed to rise for Lord's. The next service, just before dawn. That means maybe 2 hours of rest. The monks have no alarms. They trust one another, and more importantly, they trust the candles. You close your eyes, and in that in-between space where dreams begin to stir, your mind floats back to the question you couldn't stop asking during your watch. How did they make these things so precise? Aha, there's your next lesson. You're roused before the sun has even blinked. A soft knock, a whispered name. You blink away the dream of dripping wax and the smell of rosemary, and follow Brother Edwin down a back stair. You're going to The candle workshop, yes, monasteries had those too. The workshop is low-roofed and earthy, with long wooden tables smudged in old wax spills. The air smells like bees and burnt cotton. Shelves hold rows of candle mold cylinders made from wood, tin, or sometimes fired clay. There's a giant copper cauldron in the corner, blackened from years of boiling. It's filled with yellowish lumps floating in slowly steaming water. Beeswax. That was the gold standard. In richer monasteries like this one, candles were made not from cheap tallow, which smoked and smelled of animal fat, but from beeswax, cleaner, slower burning, and deeply symbolic. Beeswax represented purity. Virgin bees, virgin wax, a flame offered without corruption. Not bad for something you drip into a mold, Brother Alcuin oversees this sacred goo. He's an old monk with a voice like honey scraped over gravel, and a fondness for exactitude. A candle, he murmurs, is a sermon you don't have to shout. He demonstrates the process slowly, as if teaching a child or maybe a particularly inattentive goat. First, you melt the beeswax until it's smooth and golden. Then you prepare your molds, lining them with thin cloth to ease release, and setting the wick dead center. This is the tricky part. A crooked wick means a crooked burn. Too loose, and it drowns in its own wax. Too tight, and it smokes. Monks spent years mastering the art. They often used linen thread, soaked in salt water and dried in the sun. Some added iron filings to the wick for a steadier flame. Others used marrow or even silk. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these additives and whether they were innovations or just desperate guesses from monks with nothing better to do at 3 a.m. Brother Alcuin lets you try. Your fingers tremble as you lower the wick into the mold, tying it taut. Then you help pour the wax. It's heavier than expected. It smells faintly sweet. You think, absurdly, of pastries, but this is no kitchen. This is a time factory. As the wax cools, Alcuin shows you the carving knife, a slim, wicked-looking blade used to notch the hour marks. Here, precision matters. An hour too short, and prayers come early. Too long, and breakfasts delayed. Both tragedies in different ways. He points to a finished candle. 7 notches. Each burn is 56 minutes, he says. We adjust for seasons. Summer nights are shorter, so fewer marks. In winter, we use double-height candles. You ask how? He tests them. Observation, he shrugs, and faith. Not exactly a scientific method, but it worked. Monks would record their trials, how long each candle burned, in what weather, with what wick. Some even had tables of results. Others relied entirely on experience. There are whispers of one monk in Bavaria who could gauge the exact burn rate of a new candle just by sniffing it. Probably apocryphal, but charming. Alcuin hands you the knife. Mark 1, he says. You do. It's crooked. He doesn't scold you, just carves over it with a swift motion that makes yours vanish. Try again tomorrow. You will. Here's a lesser-known tidbit. Some candles weren't marked visually at all. Instead, they embedded nails or tiny metal balls at regular intervals. As the wax melted, the objects would fall into a metal tray with a tiny clink, an audible clock for the blind or distracted. Medieval mindfulness. In a way, by now, the sun is breaking over the hills. The bell tolls for Lord's. You join the others in procession back to the chapel, your hands still faintly sticky from wax. You smell like a candle, and for once, that feels like a badge of honor. You kneel. You pray. The chants rise once again, and when you glance at the horologium, now freshly fitted with your clumsy little candle, you feel a strange sense of authorship. Your time is literally burning, and you realize something that no textbook ever taught. These monks, weren't just keeping time, they were shaping it, one wick, one notch, one whispered hour at a time. Asterisk, by the time breakfast is served lukewarm. Barley porridge, with a side of humility, or beginning to feel the weight of your newfound respect for timekeeping. You cradled the clay bowl in both hands, listening to the scrape of spoons around you, the rhythm of rising steam, and the shuffling of sandals on stone. The whole monastery hums like a living clock, every monk moving in tempo, governed not by the sun but by flame. You're starting to understand. The candle isn't just a timer, it's a metronome for the soul after the meal. You're invited to observe another essential ritual, the record-keeping of the candle logs. Yes, they kept logs of logs, or rather, meticulous records of candle burn rates, conditions, and adjustments. In a dusty scriptorium that smells like ink, goatskin, and warm dust, Brother Remigius opens a thick ledger with cracked leather covers and yellowed parchment. It reads more like weather data than holy text. Date, wick type, wax batch, ambient. Temperature, burn duration, March 7th, smoky burn, wick frayed, air draft noted. June 22nd, burned clean. 8-hour marks correct, no wind. Each line is an attempt to catch time in writing. You run your fingers over the columns and rows, half amused, half amazed. It's obsessive, and somehow, sweet monks were nothing if not methodical. They noticed how rain could slow a burn, or how a stiff breeze from a cracked window might snuff the flame entirely. They learned to place candles behind glass or inside wooden cabinets, open at the top but shielded from errant gusts. Some even devised rotating candle holders with little sliding doors, primitive timers that revealed the light only when the time had come. But despite their best efforts, it was never perfect. Historians still argue whether these systems were truly consistent, or just good enough for monastic work. After all, if tears happened 12 minutes late one morning, who would know? The sheep, the saints. Yet for the monks, precision mattered. It was about reverence, about showing up on time to meet God, and maybe a little about not making Brother Alcuin angry. Later that day, while you're helping scrub wax from the chapel, floor candles drip whether you're holy or not. You hear something strange, ticking, not loud, not rhythmic like a clock, more like tapping. You follow it to a small side room you haven't seen before. Brother Anselm beckons you inside. There, tucked in a corner between two scroll racks, is something that does not look medieval. It's a water clock, well, not modern, but certainly more advanced than candles. A copper bowl, suspended by a chain, with a tiny hole punched into its base. It floats inside a ceramic basin filled with water. As water drips in, the bowl slowly fills. When it tips, it clanks against a bell. Just one sand resets. You're not supposed to see this, Anselm says with a smirk. But curiosity is a kind of prayer. He shows you how it works. The flow rate is adjustable using a tiny peg. And yes, it still depends on stable temperature and air pressure. But it's more predictable than fire. These were rare in Western Europe, more common in the Islamic world and earlier Roman experiments. Yet here it is, a monastery with both flame and flow as its timekeepers. One drips wax, the other drips water. One melts, one fills, but both fall. You watch as the bowl tips again. Plink. A monk in the distance murmurs something. Time has passed, and no bell was needed. You ask Anselm why the candles persisted when better options existed. He shrugs. Candles are visible, warm, sacred. People like watching time disappear. That lands hard. There's something oddly comforting about watching a candle burn. You've done it yourself on stormy nights, on power outages, on birthdays. We've all stared at a flickering flame and felt like it understood us. Fire listens in silence. In medieval monasteries, candles became companions, and just like any companion, they had their quirks. Some candles tunneled burning down the wick too quickly and leaving wax walls. Others bloomed melted so fast they flooded themselves. Wax purity varied wildly. If the bees fed on rosemary, the candle might smell herbal. If they wandered to near onions, well, you didn't want that in your vigil candle. Monks became accidental apiarists, breeding better bees not for honey, but for consistent wax. Some even wrote little treatises on scent behavior and thermal behavior in candles. Sure, most of it was guesswork, but occasionally they nailed it. And yes, they also believed candles could cure disease. Hold one close to your belly to ease cramps. Drip wax on your chest to draw out bad humors. Burn a candle to Saint Apollonia to heal toothaches. Historians still argue whether this was faith-based medicine or just something to do when real doctors were miles away on horseback. But it adds a certain depth, doesn't it? These weren't mere clocks. They were companions, cures, confession keepers, markers of life, of death, of everything in between. By sundown, you're back in the chapel, watching the fresh candles flicker again on the altar. This time, though, you recognize their types. You smell the beeswax. You note the way the wicks curl just slightly before catching. You glance at the notch carved half an inch from the top. 1 hour, you know what that means now. And for the first time, you don't check your phone or your watch because you don't need to. You can read the room by candlelight. Asterisk, you wake in. The chill of Pradon, stirred not by a bell this time, but by the creak of sandals passing your door. A shiver tiptoes down your spine as you sit up in the darkness. There's no window in your cell, just a sliver of moonlight squeezing under the wooden door. But even without seeing it, you know it's almost time for Lord's Dot. How? Because you remember the candle left in the corridor. When you passed it on your way to sleep, the wax pool had barely formed. Now you sense that it must be nearing its final notch. One more drop and the monks will rise, stretch in silence, and make their way to the chapel for prayers. You step into the hall. The flame wavers as if greeting you. The wax has indeed crept down, obediently marking the slow, solemn approach of dawn. It's oddly touching, like the candle stayed awake for you, keeping vigil while you slept. You whisper a good morning to it. Nobody hears, but in this monastery, you suspect that kind of whisper carries weight. This morning, the monks are trying something different. They're invited. A traveling scholar has brought with him an unusual device, a wheel candle clock. You're led to a small workroom where it waits, balanced on a stone shelf, surrounded by waxy smudges and a few half-melted stubs. At first glance, it looks like a carnival toy from a very boring fair. A horizontal brass wheel with tiny clay balls evenly spaced around the rim sits poised above a row of small candles. As each candle burns down, its flame eventually weakens the thread holding the corresponding ball. The ball drops onto a drum. The drum spins. A tiny bell, tings. Voila. Time has passed. It's not particularly accurate. It's a maintenance nightmare. It's also charming as heck. This little contraption, once used in a few Persian observatories, and adapted here by overly enthusiastic Benedictines, tries to solve a basic problem. How do you automate notification using fire? Sure, candles are great for quiet, reflective timekeeping. But sometimes you want a ping, a ding, a medieval notification system, something to say, "Hey monk, you've prayed long enough. Go weed the herb garden," so they made time noisy. Some even attached small weights to burning threads that when severed would release miniature hammers. These would strike bells, knock wood blocks, or, in one memorable case, send a carved wooden dove rolling down a ramp. Historians still argue whether that was meant to symbolize the Holy Spirit or just to entertain sleepy novices. But the key here is intent. Monks weren't just using candles to track time. They were experimenting, refining, inventing, even. In lives ruled by silence and repetition, they found room for wonder after the demonstration. You joined the monks in clearing out the wax splatters and writing the tipped clay balls. The scholar smiles, a little sheepishly, as one of the monks carefully adjusts a crooked axle. "You can't rush time," he says, "but you can at least make it fall gracefully." And there it is again, that quiet love of time, not as a tyrant, but a companion. Later, over a modest meal of lentils and flatbread, the conversation turns to something unexpected: dreams. Apparently, there's a monk brother, Hilbert, who swears he can predict how long he's slept by the scent of cooled wax. The others roll their eyes, but you press him for details. "Thick air," he says, sniffing dramatically. "If the wax hardens smooth and even, it's been 2 hours. If it crinkles at the edges, more than 3. You suspect he's making this up. But still, it's a poetic idea. Time measured not in minutes, but in the texture of leftover warmth. You wonder what modern life might feel like if we paid attention like that. Now you're in the Scriptorium again, watching as 2 monks prepare a batch of timed vigil candles. These aren't for the monastery. They'll be sent to a nearby village where a sick child is being prayed for. The family can't afford a priest, but they asked for a sacred light. The monks comply without question. You notice how they whisper while preparing the wicks. A simple blessing is muttered over the wax pot. A tiny prayer scratched into the base of each candle using a bone stylus. It's barely legible, but it's there. They're sending time and hope. In one stick of fragrant beeswax, that evening, you help pack the candles for travel. Each one is wrapped in a square of linen. The oldest monk among you, Father Aurelius, carries them gently to the gate, like they're relics, and you suddenly realize, and away they are. They hold hours inside. Them, in those wicks and wax ridges, are minutes you can't get back. Time pre-packaged, ready to be burned away, not in urgency, but in devotion. Night falls again. You return to your cell, but this time you light your own candle, not to tell time, not to signal anything, just to watch it melt, to sit in stillness, to listen. The flame dances, and you swear it almost says something, not words, just warmth. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, and even though you know the candle is supposed to last exactly 1 hour, you don't really care. You'll fall asleep before it finishes. Let time keep watch. You've earned the rest. The morning smells faintly of beeswax and old stone as you rise again. Now instinctively gauging the hour by the pooled wax at your bedside. You're starting to feel like a walking candle yourself, burning a little slower, a little warmer, and maybe dripping wax in invisible places. No bell rings yet, but your stomach knows it's nearly time for the breadline. Somehow, it's the softest hours of the day that leave the deepest impressions. Today, you're being sent to the workroom just beyond the cloister garden. A monk named Brother Odo awaits you there. He's known for being a bit of a tinkerer, medieval DIY guy. If there's a broken hinge, he fixes it. If the latrine door won't shut, he invents a latch using a soup spoon and 2 feathers. And when it comes to candle clocks, he's the resident wizard. You find him hunched over a wooden board, chiseling tiny hour marks into what looks like a long wax cylinder. It's not a typical candle. This one's been molded in a tube, cooled and removed carefully so as not to break its ribbed sides. Want to see something odd? He says, without looking up. You nod. He lights the candle and waits. After a minute, a small tin pin embedded at the quarter-hour mark falls out with a soft tink. It bounces against a metal plate below, making a sound surprisingly loud in the still room. Now you know 15 minutes have passed, he grins. And if you're in the next room, you still know. It's an early form of acoustic timekeeping, a sort of monkish notification system. Simple, practical, and just a touch magical. Monks working in adjacent areas can now hear time passing, even when they can't see the candle itself. It's a marvel. Really, Brother Odo explains that this trick was probably imported from Arabic engineering texts, which sometimes made their way into monasteries via pilgrims or merchant routes. Though some believe we invented it here, he mutters. Historians still argue about that. You resist the urge to ask him if he minds not knowing. Instead, you listen to the silence between tinks, each one marking time, each one strangely satisfying. You wonder what modern people would make of this invention. Would it wind up as a novelty on someone's desk? A TikTok trend? Or would we miss the whole point, the quiet reverence of it? The candle flickers, and another pin drops. Time speaks again, softly but firmly. And then Brother Odo shows you something stranger still. He brings out a candle shaped like a man, not a stick, not a taper ram. Actual wax effigy with little grooves marked across its chest, arms, and legs. This, he says, is a life candle. You stare. Apparently, these were once used as both devotional tools and, in some circles, rudimentary medical timers. The idea was to burn the candle down to a specific groove while praying for a person's recovery, or to time the application of a poultice, or a turn of the sickbed. The grooves corresponded to symbolic parts of the body: shoulders, heart, knees, feet. It's strangely touching. A literal body of time offered up, hour by hour. But there's also a darker side. Some whispered that life candles were once used in rituals to hasten death. You glance at the melted eyes of the wax figure and decide not to ask too many questions. Instead, you help Odo prepare a few more pinners, candles, embedded with small pins. One for the refectory, one for the stables, and one rather mysteriously for the guest quarters. You don't ask who the guest is. As you pack up the candles, he hands you a final one. Yours, he says simply. You take it, noticing how the wax has been dyed faint blue with crushed woad. It's marked with only one pin halfway down. Don't light it now, he warns. Save it for a night when you need help falling asleep. You pocket the candle like a secret. In a world where everything is shared meals, prayer, silence, this feels like a quiet gift meant just for you. Later that day, you find yourself helping prepare candles for an upcoming feast day. These aren't for timekeeping, therefore. Spectacle, long spiraling tapers as thick as your wrist, some wrapped in golden thread. One even smells like cloves. Apparently, there for the high altar, to be lit in a cascading sequence during a vigil service. You help with the spacing. The timing is critical. Each candle should last just long enough to complete one psalm. You realize something humbling. These monks don't just measure time, they choreograph it like dancers in a slow, waxy ballet. Afterward, you sit in the cloister garden, now warm with afternoon sun. Bees hum lazily around the herbs, and you spot a novice gently repairing a broken sundial with a spoon and a handful of gravel. You smile. Maybe Brother Odo has a rival. Before dinner, you're given a rare treat, a chance to read from the monasteries. Copy of De Horologio Nocturno, a manuscript detailing candle clock techniques. It's in Latin, of course, with little hand-drawn diagrams of candles shaped like ladders, trees, and even dragons. One marginal note catches your eye. He who controls the wax controls the watch. It's a joke, obviously, but also not, because here, tucked away behind these cloistered walls, time is something sacred, but also bendable, shapeable, tame, able, and always burning. That night, you don't light your gifted candle. You don't need it yet. You simply lie still, thinking of wax men, falling pins, and the slow dance of fire that keeps this strange, wonderful world turning. Morning comes with a hint of lavender smokes. Someone's been burning herbs in the warming room again. You wake slowly, eyes adjusting to the pale wash of dawn sneaking through narrow stained glass. The bells haven't rung yet. Odd. But then you remember it's the first Sunday of the month. The monks are observing the silent vigil of hours, a tradition where, for one full rotation of the candle clock, no bells are rung, and the rhythms of time pass in quiet observance. You dress by habit now. Your fingers find the coarse wool of your tunic before your brain even fully catches up. You've started to live like the candle, steady, structured, always tapering towards something. The refectory is eerily quiet. No scrape of benches, no clearing of throats, just the soft footfalls of sandals and the occasional stomach grumble echoing too loudly in a space meant for silence. Meals are taken with hand signs today. Bread is passed in silence. You're beginning to recognize some of the gestures. More porridge, thank you, pass the salt, amen. It feels like being part of a slow-motion pantomime, but despite the silence, time marches on thanks, of course, to the candles. The vigil candle is lit at matins, its wide girth marked carefully to measure a full 24-hour period. Unlike the slim hour candles, this one burns slow and proud, like a sleeping lion. It's wrapped in a faint layer of silver thread, which glimmers softly as the wax pools downward. Every 3 hours, a monk quietly inspects the melted depth to ensure the monastic schedule stays intact. No alarms, no voices, just silent measurements of light and patience. As you move through the day, you begin to notice just how many other tasks are dictated by candle progress. The herbmaster in the garden uses a travel-sized candle to time his tinctures. A copyist in the Scriptorium uses one to limit his practice sessions, so he doesn't exhaust his ink or his eyesight. And in the laundry room, a sister has set a fat wax stub on a marked shelf. When the flame reaches the nail scratched into the stone, the linen's done soaking. No hourglass, no sundials, just the slow, flickering breath of wax. Later that afternoon, you're sent to help in the lesser-known chamber behind the chapel. The monks call it Orarium Tenebrista, dark hour room. It's used during winter months when sunlight barely touches the cloister walls. In this space, black curtained and tightly sealed, monks train to tell time without sight. It's like walking into a velvet-lined cave. Inside, Brother Gervas is waiting. "Take off your shoes," he whispers. You do. The floor is warm stone, the air heavy with incense. You can't see your hand in front of your face. Somewhere ahead, a candle is lit, but it's hidden behind a hooded glass box, so the room remains dark. "Now," Gervas says, "listen." At first, there's nothing. Then you hear it, drip drip. A wax drop falling into a shallow tin bowl. It echoes, one drop every 30 seconds. "You'll learn to count them," he says. "And when you reach 120, you'll know an hour has passed." You try. At first it feels like torture. You lose count around 32. But by the third attempt, your mind starts to settle. You stop counting each second and start feeling the rhythm. It's strangely comforting, like listening to rain tap against a window when you're just about to fall asleep. This is a deeper level of timekeeping, more than visual, almost bodily. You're not just tracking time, you're internalizing it, learning to feel hours as a weight, a rhythm, a slow heartbeat in the dark. Historians still debate whether this dark hour training was common practice or unique to certain monastic orders. Some argue it was a form of spiritual discipline. Others believe it was a practical necessity, training monks to function during long winter vigils when candles might fail or run out. You don't know who's right, but you do know that when Gerv finally whispers, 1 hour, your body already knew it, and that's something a mechanical clock can't teach. After the session, you return to the daylight world, feeling both lighter and heavier. The sun looks brighter, the bells sound louder, and the flicker of candlelight now feels like a conversation you understand. Evening arrives with a rare communal treat, an outdoor service by the west cloister wall, lit entirely by tiered candles. It's called the Lumen Paxes, the light of peace, 60 candles, arranged in a rough spiral, each marked to burn for 10 minutes. As the monks chant psalms, a helper walks in slow circles, lighting one candle every time the last one dims. You watch, transfixed. The spiral glows brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again, moving like breath. Each candle gives way to the next without pause, creating the illusion of a never-ending flame. It's mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. And then you realize something. This isn't just about time. It's about continuity, about trust. The monks trust the wax. The wax trusts the wick. The flame trusts the air. And you oddly enough are starting to trust all of it too. You end your day sitting beside the Vigil candle again, watching the silver thread turn black and curl away like a dying fern. The silence is softer now, not empty, but full of motion. Like water below a frozen stream, still flowing, just hidden. Before bed, you finally light the candle Brother Odo gave you. Just for a moment, it smells faintly of juniper, and something sweet you can't name. You watch the tiny flame, no bigger than a thumb, dance on the tip, and somewhere, in the dark, you feel time stretching long and soft and gentle, just like this. Night, the next morning, the bells resume their duty with cheerful insistence, as if making up for yesterday's quiet. You groggily pull yourself from your cot, your limbs stiff, and your thoughts still drifting somewhere near the candle spiral. Even now, as you move through your morning tasks, something feels slightly altered. The silence from the vigil still lingers in your chest like a soft echo. Time no longer feels like something you measure. It feels like something you inhabit. You've been assigned today to assist Brother Theodric in the sacristy, where sacred objects are prepared for the daily offices in Mass. It's a dim room, humid with incense and thick with the scent of beeswax polish. Shelves are crammed with ornate vessels, embroidered cloth, and a staggering number of candles, some decorated for feast days, others plain and stout, and a few intriguingly thin and twisted like sugar sticks. Your job is to catalogue them, by candlelight, naturally. Brother Theodric teaches you how to distinguish a blessing taper from a watch candle. The blessing tapers are usually made with a mix of beeswax and a trace of cedar oil. The watch candles, longer and plainer, are sometimes weighted with a tiny bit of lead at the bottom to keep them upright in breezy conditions, fringe practice some monasteries frown upon, arguing it interferes with the purity of flame. But the real highlight comes mid-morning, when Theodric pulls out a long scroll and unfurls it across a table. It's a liturgical candle schedule, lovingly illustrated with golden suns and little wax-dripping doodles that look like sleepy ghosts. Each entry marks not just the time to light a particular candle, but why. Certain feast days have double candles, others are lit in reverse order, beginning with the longest and ending on the stubbiest, as a symbolic return to humility. One rare entry even mentions a candle infused with rose petals, burned only on the day of St. Radic's miracle, when she was said to have fasted so long her shadow forgot how to follow her. You chuckle softly at that. Her shadow forgot. Theodric shrugs. Historians still argue whether that was metaphor or malnutrition. He's probably not wrong after the inventory. You help prepare the Paschal candle, massive thing, nearly as tall as you, and probably older. Its base is engraved with little notches from past Easters, and this year's mark will be added tomorrow. It's the monastery ceremonial heart, lit during major holy days and carefully extinguished between them. Only 3 people are allowed to carry it, and one of them has to be under the age of 21, a rule that no one can seem to explain, though some believe it's a nod to youthful spirit or perhaps lighter backs. You volunteered to help carve the date into the wax. It's harder than you expected, like scratching into old leather, but it's strangely satisfying. Your hands warm the surface, and soon enough, the numbers 1, 3, 2, 4 are etched into place back in the hallway. You run into Sister Alice. She's pushing a cart stacked with oddly shaped candles, some with small cages around the flame, others wrapped in what looks like damp cloth. Storm candles, she says with a grin, for when wind tries to argue with us. The storm candles are part of the monastery's disaster preparedness ritual, an old but oddly well-organized system for ensuring timekeeping continues, even during high winds, rain, or snow. These candles are engineered with thicker bases, sunken wicks, and even miniature shields made from copper scraps or polished bone. Some even have braided twin wicks. If one goes out, the other picks up the slack, and once again you're amazed at how deeply they've thought this through. You always assumed monks prayed and read and maybe hoed a field now and then. You didn't realize they also engineered wax technology that could rival a Victorian inventor's worst daydream. After lunch, turnips are guignol sent to the tower, not to ring the bells, thankfully, but to assist Brother Odrin in something called candle harmonizing. It sounds musical. It's not. The bell tower has its own timekeeping system, separate from the standard hours. This one uses 3 parallel candles, each with different burn rates, one slow, one medium, one fast. They're lit simultaneously during special processions or in times of emergency, when precise intervals are needed for coordinated tasks, like gathering everyone for a flood drill or ringing certain bells in a prescribed rhythm. Here's the clever bit. The wax pools are allowed to drip into different copper bowls, and the sound of dripping light, medium, or rapid tells monks exactly how far into the interval they are, like a medieval metronome, but leakier. And that's where you come in. Your job is to align the wicks, trim them precisely, and note the speed at which each candle burns. You learn to spot wick flare-ups, wax tunneling, and other tiny malfunctions that throw the whole system off. Odrin shows you how to train a candle burning it in short bursts until it learns to melt evenly, a practice monks call taming the flame. It's absurd. It's brilliant. You're obsessed. That evening, as you walk back down the tower steps, a thought occurs to you in the outside world. Time is measured in seconds and minutes, numbers, units. But here, time has shape, texture, personality. A fast candle and a slow candle don't just mark different lengths, they tell different stories. The slow one is patient, stoic, possibly a bit smug. The fast one burns with urgency, hope, maybe, a hint of recklessness. You return to your cell and write this thought in the margin of your Rule of St. Benedict copy. Then, just before bed, you light the candle again, your little one, the juniper sweet one, and, for a while, you simply watch, letting it speak, letting it count, letting it remind you gently, warmly, that time, in this place, is always burning. Asterisk the next morning comes not with a bell, but with a yawn so wide it nearly cracks your jaw. You're half asleep, halfway through a bowl of barley porridge, when a note arrives. Not a spoken command, not a knock on the door, but a neatly folded square of parchment slipped under your door like a whisper. In tidy, spidery script, meet Brother Aldrich at the herb garden, wear boots. Now, when someone tells you to wear boots in a monastery, it usually means one of three things: mud, manure, or mystery. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, it's all three. The herb garden lies at the far edge of the cloister wall, beyond the tidy rows of cabbages and leeks, tucked behind a stone chapel that hasn't seen use since the last abbot decided the roof was more whole than shingle. Brother Aldrich is already there, stooped over a wooden table covered in bundles of dried stems, roots, and leaves. His boots are caked in something that looks suspiciously alive. You try not to notice. "I'm glad you came," he says, without looking up. "Today we test some theories, old ones." Turns out, Aldrich is the monastery's unofficial experimenter, sort of monk who reads herbal compendia, not just for the cures, but for the weird side notes. And today, you're diving into one of those notes, the mysterious scented thyme, candles of southern France. According to one 12th century parchment, certain monasteries tried to embed herbal timing into their candles, not just to measure hours, but to feel them. Candles were layered with fragrant herbs that would release their scent at set intervals. Lavender for early hours, chamomile for mid-afternoon, mint to stir drowsy monks during evening readings. I tried clove once. Mutters, digging through a barrel. Mistake, they all started sneezing during sext. He hands you a tightly rolled candlewick as your wrist, with visible bands of dried herbs compressed into the wax. Like some kind of botanical lasagna, you spend the rest of the day helping him burn these curious contraptions. Each one is suspended inside a tall, glassless lantern case to shield the flame from wind. And underneath, Small parchment notes wait to record the time of scent release. The first candle, layered with thyme, takes 37 minutes to release its aroma, woody and almost peppery. The second, stuffed with lemon balm and sage smells, smelling within 22 minutes, but then fizzles into a sort of waxy smog that coats your tongue. Delicious. Then comes the real prize, the layered Vigil candle, made with 4 herbs, each intended to mark 1/4 of the monastic night watch. It starts sweet, almost floral, clearly lavender, then transitions to bitter rosemary, then a smoky myrrh-like patch, and finally ends with something you'd swear was anise. It's like a playlist of perfumes, designed to pull you gently through the hours, without ever needing to glance at a clock. But here's the problem. None of the burn times are consistent. Some herbs char too quickly, others clog the flame, and sometimes the scent doesn't arrive at all. Aldrich scribbles in his notebook furiously, crossing out entire entries with the kind of dramatic flair only a sleep-deprived monk scientist can muster. He sighs. Historians still argue whether these candles actually worked or were just meant to seem impressive. There's no consensus. Some say they were never meant to tell time, just to guide mood. Others claim they were faked entirely. For visiting bishops, you lean back against a mossy wall and think about that. There's something strangely touching about the idea of a candle designed not to measure hours precisely, but to color them like dye in water, gradually tinting your mood, a medieval mood ring, if you like, except it burns. That evening, you help Aldrich clean up the work table, your fingers sticky with honey wax, and your nose full of clashing herbs. He hands you a small candle as a gift, one of the better prototypes. Take this for compliment light. It when you feel the mind drifting, the rosemary might keep your skull from melting. A kind thought. Perhaps a worrying one. After supper, you head toward the cloister's main corridors, the long, echoing hallway where monks walk silently after prayers. Sometimes just to think, sometimes just to listen to their own footsteps. But tonight, there's something new. A tiny shelf has appeared along the stone wall, with 6 small candles lit in a row, each one a slightly different color and height. Above them, a little wooden sign reads, "Pace candles, take one, walk slow." You hesitate. Then you take one. Pale, blue, stubby, just about an hour's worth of wax, and you walk. Not for any reason, not to get somewhere, just to walk, slowly, the way monks have for centuries. Past the silent arches, past the moonlit windows, past the flaking statue of Saint Jerome with his weirdly tiny lion. You notice how the candle shifts in your grip, how the light flickers when you pass a draught. You watch the wax pool slowly, lazily, like syrup on stone. You hear your footsteps on the cold tile. You hear your own breath. You begin to understand why monks lit candles even when they didn't need to, because it gave the silence something to hold. At the end of the walk, your candle is nearly out. You blow it gently. Watch the last curl of smoke rise into the vaulted air and then vanish, and for a moment, you don't care what time it is. Because for once, you're not measuring the hour, you're living inside it.